Hey guys, tonight we're wandering into the velvet-draped, perfume-clouded boudoirs of history, the world of the opium ladies of Victorian London. Not your grandmother's history lesson, unless your grandmother had a secret laudanum habit and a poodle named Byron. Tonight, we'll drift through smoky parlors and creaking boarding houses, meeting women who could recite Keats by candlelight, network with duchesses and dockworkers alike, and still negotiate a discount on imported Turkish delight. Because in Victorian London, if you wanted a little peace, a little glamour, and maybe to forget the sound of horse dung being carted outside your window, you didn't go to the spa. You went to the apothecary and asked for the special tincture. And since this is our brand new channel, before you settle in, maybe take a second to hit like and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what you find here. Leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, switch on a fan for that comforting white noise, get cozy, and maybe lock up your Victorian family heirlooms, just in case they start whispering secrets. Let's pause for a moment. Have you ever wondered what Victorian women actually did all day, besides fainting and playing the piano? How did one choose between tea, gin, or opium-laced cough syrup? Did they actually swoon? Or was it just an excuse to avoid doing the laundry? Was taking the waters just code for, please let me nap in peace for 2 hours? And did everyone have a tragic backstory involving a ship captain, a bad haircut, and a haunted hairbrush? Get ready, because you're about to wake up in 1853, on the foggy edge of Soho, with a head full of dreams, a purse full of nothing, and a society doctor who prescribes drops for everything except your existential dread. Good luck. Let's start with the dawn. You awaken, not to birdsong or sunlight, but to the slow, syrupy groan of London's smog pressing against the window panes. Someone is playing Chopin badly in the next room. You blink at velvet drapes, a chipped porcelain pipe on your nightstand, and a mysterious new bruise. Welcome to a day in the life. You try to stretch, but your limbs are heavy, stuffed with fog, regret, and perhaps a trace of Turkish resin. The air is thick, scented with a blend of floral water, spilled gin, and something faintly medicinal, like the waiting room of a doctor who prescribes more poetry than pills. The carpet beneath your feet is lush, if lush means threadbare, sticky, and faintly crunchy. You shiver, not from cold, but from the distant memory of last night's conversation about phrenology and whether or not Queen Victoria really does sleep sitting up. Somewhere in the parlor, the embers of last night's fire are still smoldering, releasing plumes of smoke that curl around the ceiling like bashful ghosts. The clock on the mantel insists it's morning, but the sun is nowhere to be seen, only a pale rectangle of light, filtered through soot and stained glass, squats sullenly on the carpet. You sit up slowly, careful not to disturb the cat, who has claimed most of your blanket and half your personal space. The cat's name is Byron. He is overweight, judgmental, and almost certainly plotting to sell your secrets to the neighbor. You wonder how much laudanum it would take to knock a cat out, but then remember the time you tried to medicate him and ended up with 3 stitches and a lesson in feline vengeance. Breakfast is a concept, not a reality. You paw through the detritus on the nightstand, crumbs of Madeira cake, a half-eaten licorice twist, and a teaspoon sticky with yesterday's syrup. A note in someone else's handwriting reminds you to pay the coalman. There is no sign of tea, but an empty teacup suggests you had some, possibly last night, possibly last week. In Victorian London, time is a circle, and your memory is an unreliable narrator. You glance out the window, hoping for inspiration. Instead, you see the street below, a river of mud, cab drivers shouting at each other, a newspaper boy bellowing headlines about a scandalous duchess, and a dog wearing a hand-knitted hat. It's almost enough to make you grateful for the protective isolation of your opium parlor, even if the wallpaper is peeling and someone painted a mustache on the portrait of Lord Byron. Across the hall, the housemaid coughs theatrically, making sure you know she's up and already disappointed in you. You contemplate calling her in for hot water, but that would require dignity, a voice, and the will to face questions about the state of your sheets. You pull the covers higher and wonder if you could plausibly feign consumption to buy yourself another hour in bed. You probably could. You suspect everyone in this house is faking an illness for personal gain, including Byron the cat. You finally rise, wrap yourself in a shawl that smells of lavender and mothballs, and shuffle toward the dressing table. Your reflection is defiant. Hair in disarray, eyes rimmed with coal and secrets. You practice your "I'm perfectly well, thank you" smile. It needs work. You powder your nose, pin up your hair, and consider changing out of your nightgown. You decide against it. Victorian society may expect women to be paragons of virtue, but this morning, you're aiming for semi-coherent and reasonably upright. As you shuffle toward the parlor, you pass last night's guests still slumbering on the settee, their boots tossed haphazardly by the door. You wonder if any of them actually remember what happened after midnight. You hope not. You have survived the first challenge of the day, waking up in Victorian London, slightly dizzy, faintly scandalous, and still in possession of most of your wits. That's already more than most people achieve before breakfast. Now, on to the next ordeal. Finding breakfast, and maybe, just maybe, remembering your own name. Time for breakfast, sort of. In Victorian London, you can have strong tea, burnt toast, or, if you're feeling continental, a spoonful of laudanum with a side of existential regret. The kitchen smells like boiled cabbage and perfume. The only thing missing is nutrition. You shuffle into the kitchen, still draped in your nightgown, hair pinned up haphazardly with last night's hat pin and this morning's bad decisions. The linoleum is cold underfoot, and the cat, who has, for reasons known only to him, decided to sleep in the coal scuttle, regards you with the superior indifference of an animal who has never tasted margarine. Breakfast in a Victorian parlor is less a meal and more a philosophical exercise in lowering expectations. The table is set with trembling china, 3 chipped plates, and a fork that's seen more melodrama than a Shakespearean understudy. You scan your options. There's tea, so black it might be sentient. There's toast, which, judging by the smoke in the air, could also serve as roof tiling. Someone has thoughtfully placed a dish of jam on the table, but it's mostly seeds and apologies. You pour yourself a cup of tea, the kind that could strip the paint off a garden gate. It's strong enough to make your eyelids twitch, but not strong enough to inspire optimism. You add sugar, or what passes for sugar, a lump you chipped off with a butter knife that may have once belonged to a Russian princess. Milk is available, if you're brave, curdled slightly, like Victorian morality, and floating with mysterious globules. The toast, meanwhile, is less toast and more a culinary dare. It's charred on one side, damp on the other, and somehow manages to squeak when you cut into it. You slather on the jam, hoping to mask the flavor and try to ignore the sensation that you're chewing on a heavily edited novel. In a moment of nostalgia, you remember breakfast cereals, but quickly realize those haven't been invented yet. The closest thing is oat gruel, and you're not desperate, not yet. Across the table, your flatmate, Henrietta, makes her entrance. She's clutching a bottle of laudanum in one hand and a copy of Wuthering Heights in the other. She eyes your tea with pity and offers you a swig of her breakfast tincture. You consider it. In Victorian London, laudanum is basically orange juice for the soul, except it tastes like sorrow and will eventually lead to an embarrassing poem or a duel. You decline, opting for another piece of toast and the quiet dignity of coherent thought. The conversation over breakfast is stilted. Henrietta recounts her dreams, which involve flying rats and a never-ending waltz. The cat has moved to the table and is attempting to eat your jam, which honestly, he can have. Someone outside is hawking eels. The postman shoves bills under the door, unopened, you hope, for maximum deniability. A knock at the door interrupts your meal. It's the landlady, demanding rent and expressing concern over the unladylike aroma drifting from the parlor. You assure her it's just the cabbage, but she eyes the laudanum bottle and mutters something about modern degeneracy. You offer her some toast in a show of goodwill. She declines, wisely. Back at the table, you realize the breakfast dilemma isn't about food at all. It's about choices. Do you fortify yourself with bitter tea and burnt bread? Or do you numb yourself with tinctures and the sweet oblivion of forgetfulness? Victorian mornings are all about compromise. You choose tea. You choose toast. You even consider the laudanum, but only as a last resort. As you clear your plate and glance at the gray, unpromising sky, you realize the true miracle of Victorian London isn't survival. It's managing to call this breakfast and convincing yourself it's exactly what you wanted all along. And as you head back to the parlor, you can't help but wonder, would tomorrow's breakfast be any better if you just started with the laudanum? For now, you'll settle for tea, toast, and the small comfort of having made it to noon. Fashion isn't about beauty, it's about survival. You have exactly one clean dress, 8 hat pins, and a silk shawl that's technically your roommate's. You spend half an hour deciding whether melancholy or mild hysteria pairs better with blue gingham. You stand before the cracked mirror, lit by the gray light sneaking in through the sooty window, and take inventory. Your wardrobe is a triumphant little heap in the corner, a faded brown day dress with mysterious stains, a black morning gown 2 decades out of style, and the blue gingham, freshly laundered, with only a slight whiff of coal smoke and anxiety. Technically, you also own a bonnet with 1 squashed flower and a pair of gloves, so mended they could double as lace. Victorian fashion magazines say your attire should communicate your station, your mood, and your prospects. Your attire, at best, communicates that you once had a dream and then sat down. You tug on the blue gingham, smooth the front, and attempt to arrange your features into the kind of subtle, tragic pout that's very in this season. The effect is less windswept heroine and more person who lost a coin in the gutter and is still thinking about it. Now, the hat pins. 8 of them. Some are decorative, some are practical, all are potentially lethal. There's a small but real chance you could be mistaken for a very well-armed hedgehog. You jab one through your bun, angle another for effect, and tuck the rest into your shawl for emergencies, of which, in Victorian London, there are many. Never underestimate the power of a properly wielded hat pin, especially when fending off unwanted advances, aggressive geese, or the occasional fashion rival. The silk shawl, though borrowed, is your only concession to luxury. It's soft, slightly frayed, and still smells faintly of lavender and someone else's perfume. You wrap it around your shoulders and try not to think about how Henrietta will glare at you when you get back if she notices it missing at all. In this house, possessions migrate according to need, guilt, and who last paid the rent. Next comes accessorizing. You consider your options. A string of imitation pearls, chipped, a silver locket, empty, and a brooch shaped like a mourning dove that's lost half its tail. For gloves, it's a choice between barely decent and decidedly avant-garde. You settle on the former, tucking the holes under your palms, and hope the fog outside is dense enough to obscure the details. Fashion is never truly complete without the right expression. You spend several minutes practicing different faces, serene melancholy, fragile optimism, and that distant, glassy-eyed look favored by poets and people caught in existential dread. You go with a hybrid, a blend of tragic romance, and the realization that you forgot to eat breakfast. Now, the shoes. You only have 1 pair, scuffed and squeaky, with soles so thin you can feel every cobblestone from here to Covent Garden. You stuff a page of last week's newspaper in the toes, both for insulation and as a kind of spiritual cushioning. It doesn't help, but at least you know the stock prices as you limp along. Before leaving, you give yourself a final once-over. You look prepared. Not for success, perhaps, but for endurance. That's what Victorian fashion is, armor for the battlefield of social loitering. The object is not to dazzle but to blend, like a sparrow among pigeons, a minor chord in the background music of London. You step into the hall, instantly greeted by the judgmental gaze of Byron the cat, who knows all your secrets and would sell them for a tin of sardines. As you close the door behind you, you draw the shawl tighter and remind yourself that, in this city, fashionable just means didn't freeze to death and made it out the door. Today's look is tragic resilience, lightly accessorized. Tomorrow, who knows? But at least, for now, you've survived the greatest challenge of all, getting dressed with dignity and only a moderate amount of theft. Time to loiter, and may your hat pins stay sharp. You need supplies: opium, hair tonic, and perhaps a pastry. The apothecary knows your name. The grocer does not. You navigate London's muddy streets, carefully avoiding eye contact with anyone who looks judgmental, which is everyone. Shopping in Victorian London is less an errand and more an exercise in covert operations. You step out the front door, shawl wrapped tightly, hat brim low, not for the weather, but for plausible deniability. The air is thick with fog and hoarse, and every cobblestone has been personally lubricated by the city's endless parade of drizzle, stray dogs, and other substances, best not contemplated before breakfast. You set out with a list, written in tiny, cramped script. It is important that, should it fall into the wrong hands, nobody can decipher whether you're buying cough syrup or gathering ingredients for a mild social revolution. Your first stop is always the apothecary, tucked between a milliner's shop and a storefront that sells nothing but socks and broken dreams. The bell above the door rings as you enter, a sound so familiar you're fairly certain it's tuned to your personal frequency. The apothecary greets you by name, which is either flattering or slightly concerning. He gestures discreetly toward the back shelf, where the laudanum sits nestled between rosewater and liver pills. You request your usual, and he produces a brown glass bottle with a label so vague it could be medicine, poison, or salad dressing. He slips it into a paper parcel with the kind of practiced discretion usually reserved for international spies and people buying embarrassing novels. Next, you consider the hair tonic. It promises lustrous locks and inner tranquility, but smells faintly of old cloves and regret. You add it to your basket anyway. Nothing says I have my life together like shiny hair, even if your insides are mostly made of toast and unspoken fears. A tin of violet pastilles completes your purchase, good for the nerves, and, if you're honest, a pleasant distraction during awkward pauses in conversation. You thank the apothecary, who wishes you an uneventful day, which in Victorian London is code for may no one find out how you spend your evenings. You tuck the parcel deep into your handbag, surrounded by layers of handkerchiefs and plausible denials. Now comes the challenge, the grocer. Unlike the apothecary, the grocer does not know your name, your ailments, or your preferred brand of self-medication. This is exactly how you'd like to keep it. You step inside, adopting an air of polite disinterest. The shop is crammed with potatoes, turnips, and a mysterious meat pie that has somehow been both overcooked and undercooked at the same time. You need a pastry, but you don't want to seem desperate. You hover near the bread, examining a scone as if it holds the answers to life's deepest questions. The grocer glances over, sizing you up as someone who might, at any moment, recite a poem or burst into tears. You select a currant bun, with the gravitas of a duchess selecting her second husband, pay in exact change, and escape before he can ask your name or, worse, offer unsolicited advice about fiber. Back on the street, the pastry is still warm in your pocket, your tonic clinks reassuringly, and you feel the fragile satisfaction of a mission accomplished. You weave through the throng, careful to avoid mud puddles, aggressive chickens, and your neighbor Mrs. Witherspoon, who is always 2 questions away from unearthing your deepest secrets. On the way home, you allow yourself one final stop at the bookseller's stall. You purchase a battered volume of poetry and tuck it between the hair tonic and the laudanum, as if literature could function as a moral alibi. You arrive home triumphant. You have obtained everything you need: medicine, beauty, sustenance, plausible deniability, and a snack. In Victorian London, this is as close to winning as anyone ever gets. And as you unpack your shopping in the privacy of your own parlor, you reflect that shopping is less about what you buy and more about what you're able to pretend you don't need. Let's talk about tea. It's not just a drink, it's the Victorian internet. Your friends arrive, armed with parasols and secrets. Every scandal is discussed. Who eloped, who overdosed, who got a new poodle, who's pretending not to be French. You pour the tea, strong, black, and possibly old enough to qualify for a pension. The pot is a little chipped, the cups mismatched, but nobody is here for the porcelain. The sugar bowl is as empty as the landlady's promises, and the milk has started its own quiet rebellion, curdling at the edges of polite society. Still, no one complains. It's not about the tea. It's about the stories that swirl with the steam, rising into the parlor like so many whispered confessions. The first order of business is seats. There's always an unspoken battle for the armchair closest to the biscuits. But you, as host, have staked your claim with a decorative cushion and a glare that brooks no argument. The rest settle on creaky settees and fainting couches, their skirts billowing, parasols folded with a flourish, each woman performing the subtle art of sitting gracefully atop 3 layers of crinoline and at least 1 layer of personal drama. The conversation begins innocently enough. A neighbor's new curtains, the state of the cobblestones, the peculiar smell drifting from the milliner's shop, possibly cheese, possibly crime. But within moments, the real gossip bubbles up. Did you hear about Miss Larkspur, who allegedly fainted at the opera, but was seen later devouring an entire ham at the Savoy? Or Lady Digby, who claims her new lapdog is an Italian import, though it seems suspiciously similar to the butcher's terrier from 2 streets over. Spoons clink, someone gasps, someone else covers a laugh with a cough. There's a brief competitive silence as everyone mentally sorts through their best stories, the juiciest rumors, the scandals so fresh they're still practically steaming. Your friend Josephine, queen of the strategic eyebrow, leans forward. She's heard that Mr. Forsyth is engaged, not to the vicar's daughter, as everyone assumed, but to his own second cousin's governess, who, it is whispered, cannot even play the pianoforte. The conversation ripples out in a dozen directions. Illicit affairs, botched proposals, mysterious new haircuts. Someone mentions a séance gone awry, involving 2 overturned tables, a misplaced parrot, and a letter from the spirit of Napoleon that, in retrospect, bore a striking resemblance to Mrs. Wellington's handwriting. For a moment, even the cat is riveted, perched on the windowsill like a particularly gossipy gargoyle. You try to steer the conversation toward safer ground, charity bazaars, the upcoming flower show, the latest dreadful serialization in the Times, but the group is relentless. They dissect fortunes, reputations, and the questionable morality of anyone who has ever missed church twice in a row. All of it delivered in honeyed tones and with the plausible deniability of someone who claims to be just passing it along. Modern social media has nothing on this. At least on Facebook, you can unfriend someone. Here, you have to sit beside her every Tuesday and pretend you haven't heard the story about her cousin and the unfortunate incident with the lobster. The tea is refilled. The biscuits dwindle. Someone's parasol is missing, probably commandeered by the cat, who is now the subject of a minor feud regarding who last fed him and whether he prefers sardines or scandal. Henrietta sighs dramatically, declaring she cannot possibly face another day of such excitement, though everyone knows she'll be the first to ring your bell with a fresh batch of rumors tomorrow. As the afternoon wanes, your friends gather their shawls, their secrets, and the last crumbs of the ginger cake. They depart in a flutter of pleasantries and well-rehearsed innocence, promising to return soon just for tea. And as you close the door behind them, you realize nothing in Victorian London travels faster than news shared over a slightly curdled cup of tea, except, perhaps, the realization that you are now responsible for refilling the biscuit tin and finding out who exactly is pretending not to be French. Feeling unwell? Call the doctor. He'll ask about your appetite, nod gravely, and prescribe a soothing mixture of morphine, syrup, and wishful thinking. You leave with a bottle and a vague sense of doom. The process begins with a note, handwritten, blotted with ink and existential dread, delivered to the doctor's surgery by a small, suspiciously fast child in a cap. Victorian medicine is less science and more well-meaning guesswork with an impressive hat. You spend the intervening hour sitting on the parlor sofa, wrapped in a shawl, practicing your sickliest cough and wondering whether to exaggerate your symptoms or just lean into the poetry of malaise. When the doctor arrives, he's a flurry of whiskers, black wool, and the faint aroma of tobacco and carbolic. He enters with the gravitas of a man who has seen both sides of a city-wide outbreak of gout and survived, and who considers hand-washing an unnecessary French affectation. He asks after your mother, your appetite, and your most recent bowel movement. You answer honestly to the first two, and invent something suitably vague for the third. He sits at your side, places two icy fingers on your wrist, and stares at the wall as if the wallpaper holds medical secrets. Pulse is present, he declares, which is about as hopeful as Victorian diagnoses get. He asks if you've been sleeping well. You admit to troubled dreams. He suggests a nourishing broth, but quickly decides a bottle of something brown and potent is the real answer. Out comes the little black bag, stuffed with everything from smelling salts to a bottle ominously labeled Elixir of Restoration. Contains no more than 80% alcohol. He removes a notebook and begins scribbling instructions in illegible Latin. You're reasonably sure he's just writing. Give patient enough opium to sedate a horse, then hope for the best. He inquires about your nerves. You nod earnestly. He prescribes a soothing draught for nerves, digestion, cough, ennui, and the vapors, all covered by the same bottle. Next comes the examination, a tap on the chest, a squint at your tongue, and a moment where he asks you to breathe deeply while looking away, presumably to avoid any accountability. He checks your eyes, shakes his head as if you've failed a moral test, and writes another note, this time addressed to the pharmacist. Take as needed, he says, which is Victorian, for try not to run out before the end of the week. You pay him with whatever coins you have at hand, plus the hope that he won't mention your living conditions at the next church supper. He tucks his fee into his coat, tips his hat, and vanishes into the fog, presumably off to cure another patient by giving them enough laudanum to forget their own name. You stare at the prescription. Morphine, laudanum, tincture of poppy, to be taken whenever symptoms arise or life feels overwhelming, whichever comes first. The instructions are reassuringly vague. You walk to the pharmacy, where the apothecary hands over a heavy glass bottle with a warning to mind the dosage and an understanding look that says nobody ever does. Back home, you pour a measured spoonful into a chipped teacup, swirl it thoughtfully, and wonder if anyone has ever actually recovered from a Victorian illness, or if everyone just quietly moves through life in a state of medicated bewilderment. Henrietta offers you a biscuit and suggests taking your tonic with a bit of sherry for fortitude. The cat sniffs the bottle and recoils in horror, a rare moment of agreement. By evening, you feel pleasantly detached, drifting between rooms, mildly hopeful and entirely unmotivated. Your appetite is gone, your anxiety dulled, and your sense of direction permanently compromised. The bottle sits on the mantel, half empty already. In Victorian London, the cure for what ails you is simple: opium, syrup, and an optimistic shrug. If that doesn't work, you can always try fainting stylishly and hope for a better prescription in your next life. By midday, it's time for a little collapse. The swooning couch is calling. You drape yourself artfully, clutch a lace handkerchief, and sigh. The housemaid is unimpressed. The cat is asleep on your ankles. Victorian life is exhausting, especially when most of it is performed for dramatic effect. The morning's flurry of shopping, tea, and unsolicited medical advice has left your nerves as frayed as your gloves. You shuffle toward the drawing room, aiming directly for the swooning couch, a faded relic in plum velvet, strategically positioned beneath the window for maximum visibility to anyone peering in from the street. The ritual is precise. First, you let out a small gasp, just enough to signal that you are perilously close to the vapors, a catch-all affliction for anyone who needs to recline at noon with a clear conscience. You fall, not into the sofa, but onto it, catching yourself at the last possible second to avoid creasing your dress. A sigh escapes your lips. For historical accuracy, you might even dab your forehead with a dampened handkerchief and mutter something about the weight of existence. The housemaid, busy dusting the sideboard, glances over and rolls her eyes. She's seen better performances in the fish market. The swooning couch itself has a storied past. Upholstered in what was once the height of fashion, now slightly threadbare and adorned with mysterious stains, it has supported everything from fainting ladies to bored poets to the occasional sleepwalking guest. You can still detect a faint aroma of lavender sachets, mothballs, and possibly despair. It cradles you in a way that suggests sympathy, or at least a resigned acceptance of your general condition. As you recline, you become an honorary member of an unofficial society, the Swooners Guild, an alliance of Victorian women united by their shared love of dramatic horizontalism. Requirements for entry: at least 2 family scandals, a collection of lace handkerchiefs, and an ability to sigh with conviction. The meetings are always scheduled for just after a minor disappointment. Agenda items include top 5 feigning spells of the season and creative uses for smelling salts. You stare at the ceiling, tracing the water stain, shaped like a disapproving ant. Byron, the cat, is snoring on your feet, radiating both warmth and an air of silent judgment. Outside, the city continues its daily chaos: shouts, carriage wheels, a dog yapping somewhere near the bakery. You, however, have checked out. For the next 15 minutes, you are officially unavailable, suffering nobly from invisible ailments and an acute sensitivity to social obligations. To outsiders, the swooning couch is a symbol of feminine fragility. In reality, it's a tactical retreat, a place to avoid chores, evade visitors, or simply gather one's wits before the next round of melodrama. You have learned, through bitter experience, that the more delicately you swoon, the less likely you are to be asked to help peel potatoes or answer awkward questions about the rent. Your friends understand. In fact, many of them have their own favorite couches, velvet chaises, window seats, or, if truly desperate, the cool tiles of the scullery floor. It is an art, not a science. Some prefer to swoon in silence, others with a little aria for effect. You opt for the middle ground, a sigh just audible enough to inspire concern but not so loud as to warrant actual medical intervention. Eventually, the housemaid drops a folded newspaper on your lap, a subtle suggestion that you either revive yourself or relocate. Byron stretches, flicks his tail, and vacates the sofa, his work as a therapeutic weight completed. You rise, repin your hair, and prepare to face the afternoon, fortified by 15 minutes of glorious, unproductive recumbency. In Victorian London, a good swoon is better than a holiday, and if performed with sufficient flair, guarantees you'll never be asked to carry anything heavier than a porcelain teacup. Outside, London is alive with costermongers, horses, and the eternal threat of being recognized by your neighbor while buying licorice. The fog is so thick you could disappear entirely, which, honestly, sounds appealing. You step out into the street like a woman entering a battlefield armed with nothing but a shawl, a hat pin, and the fragile belief that you won't be emotionally wounded by eye contact. Immediately, your senses are assaulted. London doesn't ease you into the day. London hits you with the full orchestra. There's the clatter of carriage wheels, like someone shaking a box of bricks down the road. There's the endless, wet slap of hooves on mud. There's a man shouting about eels in a voice that suggests he's either selling seafood or summoning demons. Somewhere nearby, a woman is arguing with a butcher as if her honor depends on the thickness of a sausage. And above it all is that constant familiar smell, horse, smoke, damp wool, and the distant hint of cabbage that follows you through life like a curse. The fog curls around you like it's trying to claim you. It's the kind of fog that gets into your hair, your lungs, and your soul. It softens the edges of buildings and people until everyone looks like a ghost who didn't quite finish forming. It's both terrifying and comforting. On one hand, you could vanish completely and become a rumor. On the other hand, you might accidentally walk straight into a horse, which would be a very Victorian way to go. The streets are crowded with people who look like they're all rushing somewhere urgent, even if that urgent place is just away from their own thoughts. Costermongers shout over one another, hawking apples, onions, flowers, cheap ribbons, and suspicious meat pies that have definitely seen things. Children dart between legs like tiny thieves in training. Men in caps haul crates, coughing theatrically like they want the whole world to know they're suffering. Women in worn shawls drag baskets heavier than their hopes. And you? You're trying to look casual. You're trying to walk like you belong here. Like you're not a delicate flower of society just one loud sound away from fainting into a puddle. But the anxiety is constant. Victorian London is a city where everyone is watching everyone else, not because they care, but because they're bored, tired, and starving for information. You can feel eyes on you, some curious, some judgmental, some just checking if you look wealthy enough to be pickpocketed. Every passerby could be a gossip carrier. Every neighbor could become an accidental witness to your deeply private act of purchasing licorice. You spot her too, the neighbor, Mrs. Witherspoon. She appears out of the fog like a moral consequence. Her hat is perfectly arranged, her mouth is permanently in the shape of disapproval, and her eyes are scanning the street the way a hawk scans a field, not for prey, for scandal. You freeze for half a second, then adjust your path with the speed of someone avoiding an X in the grocery store. You tuck your chin, angle your bonnet, and pretend to be intensely fascinated by a lamppost. You are now studying Victorian street lighting like it's your lifelong passion. This is survival. A cart rattles past, splashing mud up the hem of your dress. You wince. That mud is not just dirt. That mud is history. That mud contains horse droppings, boot scraps, coal ash, and probably half of London's regrets. You walk faster, feeling the damp soak into your shoes. It's like stepping on a wet sponge that hates you personally. And then there's the sound. London never stops making it. Even the silence here feels loud. There are bells, shouts, clinks of metal, dogs barking, street musicians scraping out tunes that might be music if you didn't value peace. Every noise feels like it's aimed directly at your nerves, which are already running on tea, opium, and pure stubbornness. You try to keep your expression neutral, but inside you're doing what every modern person does in a crowded space, panicking quietly and imagining your own dramatic escape. You fantasize about living somewhere peaceful, like the countryside, where the only sound is birds and the occasional scream from a man falling into a well. Or maybe the future, where people don't shout about eels and you can buy licorice without feeling like you're being morally assessed. But you keep moving. You hold your shawl tight. You dodge puddles, carts, strangers, and Mrs. Witherspoon's hovering shadow. Because in Victorian London, simply existing in public is an extreme sport. And somehow, the most dangerous part isn't the fog, the mud, or the horses. It's being recognized while buying candy like you're doing something shameful. You consider embroidery, briefly. You contemplate starting a novel, then realize you don't have a desk, a pen, or a plot. Instead, you rearrange hairpins and try not to think about mortality. Victorian society insists there are only two types of women, those who embroider and those who inspire rumors. You are determined to be both. You survey your collection of needlepoint supplies, a hoop, several knotted lengths of thread, and a sampler you started in 1847. The sampler reads "Home Sweet," and then trails off into a tangle of knots, existential uncertainty, and a vague sketch of what might be a potato or a very misshapen dog. Embroidery is supposed to be calming. This is a lie perpetuated by women with better eyesight and lower standards for straight lines. You attempt a daisy, but it comes out looking more like a warning symbol. Your mind drifts as you sew. Each stitch is another opportunity to ponder life's big questions. Will anyone ever marry a woman who can't finish a cross-stitch alphabet? Would finishing a cross-stitch alphabet even help? Is this hobby supposed to fill the endless afternoons, or simply give you something to hold when your mind wanders off to darker topics, like the mortality rate for people who eat street pies? You put down the hoop and stare out the window, where a pair of sparrows are having a marital dispute on the windowsill. If only Victorian marriage could be solved by flapping one's wings and making noise until someone flies away. You consider writing a novel, as so many heroines do. You envision yourself as the next Bronte. Unfortunately, your writing tools are limited to a blunt pencil, a broken slate, and a page torn from last week's grocer's circular advertising, potatoes, turnips, and unexpected grief. Still, you try. You scribble an opening line. It was a dark and foggy morning in London. You run out of inspiration, then space. The rest of the story will have to wait until the grocer restocks his flyers. With literature on pause, you return to what you know, rearranging hairpins. Some are for holding up your hair, some are for defending yourself against aggressive poodles, and the rest are simply insurance against life's unpredictability. You organize them by size, by level of sentimental attachment, and by most likely to be borrowed and never seen again. This task, while technically productive, is really just an excuse not to contemplate your own eventual decline into spinsterhood and spiritual malaise. Needlework and hairpins can only do so much to distract from the crushing boredom and quiet desperation of Victorian womanhood. The hours crawl. You consider other hobbies. Painting, you have no paint. Learning Italian, you have no Italians. Playing the pianoforte, the only keys you have are to a squeaky cupboard and the front door, both off limits during nap time. You try reading. There's a well-thumbed copy of Practical Etiquette for the Modern Lady, which reads less like a guide and more like a list of things you're doing wrong at any given moment. You read the section on making conversation with strangers and realize you're more comfortable holding a séance than speaking to a new neighbor. Eventually, you settle for doing nothing at all, a luxury and a curse. You watch the dust motes swirl in the sunlight, invent elaborate backstories for the flies on the windowsill, and drift gently into a reverie that's equal parts daydream and existential panic. The cat, sensing your mood, curls up on your lap and purrs in solidarity. You decide that, for today, you will accomplish exactly as much as the cat, absolutely nothing, with an air of supreme dignity. And in Victorian London, that's not just survival. It's a small, quiet victory. Friendship in Victorian London is a full-contact sport. You trust your best friend with your secrets, your hopes, and your opium ration. She, in turn, trusts you not to steal her fiancé. It's a delicate balance. It's easy to imagine that life in a city, so foggy and crowded, would foster unbreakable bonds, kindred spirits united against the daily assault of soot, cabbage, and the constant risk of consumption. But in reality, Victorian friendship is a fragile alliance built on compliments, whispered confidences, and the ever-present possibility of strategic betrayal. You and your closest companions are always together, linked by hat pins, family feuds, and the memory of that disastrous Christmas pudding incident of '51. There's Henrietta, who can keep a secret for nearly 3 hours. Josephine, who's an expert at flirting, borrowing, and accidentally revealing things she absolutely promised never to share. And, of course, Edith, whose sharp wit could slice bread and whose moral code is as flexible as her dance card. The rules are simple. Always be supportive, except when you need to be competitive. If your friend is weeping over a failed romance, you are duty-bound to bring tea, advice, and at least 3 increasingly improbable stories about even worse heartbreaks. But if she's about to get engaged to the last eligible bachelor in your social circle, all bets are off. You become a well-mannered shark, circling with a compliment on her hair, and a plan for sabotage disguised as sisterly concern. Letters fly back and forth, pages of elegant script filled with coded messages. My dearest, you looked radiant at Mrs. Linton's supper, and I hardly noticed that dreadful spot on your hem. Means I'm still a little mad you wore blue after I said I'd wear blue, but let's pretend to be friends for 1 more week. Every friendship is a chess match, except the pieces are bonnets, and the pawns are your reputation. Confidences are currency. You share yours carefully, like lending out a precious necklace, only to find it returned with 3 new knots and a slightly altered clasp. You confess to eating the last scone, then discover the story has mutated into a tale of gluttony and mysterious digestive ailments circulating at the next tea party. You tell Josephine about your crush on the poet next door, and by evening, the entire street is whispering about your plans to elope with a chimney sweep. There are, of course, perks. Your friends know your favorite kind of jam and will defend your honor against Mrs. Witherspoon, the local judge, jury, and executioner of feminine virtue. They'll lend you their best gloves, with only minimal grumbling, and cover for you when you accidentally miss church for the 3rd time this month. You trust them with your heartbreak, your hangover, and your hairpins. But always, you keep a careful watch. Friendship requires vigilance. The same woman who helps you mend your stockings today may tomorrow accidentally reveal that your second cousin is wanted for goat theft in Kent. The difference between friend and frenemy is a matter of timing, tone, and how recently you've loaned her your opium drops. There are unwritten rules. Never compete directly for the same suitor, unless you're sure you can win. Always return borrowed shawls, but never the same color you took. And when gossip comes around, make sure you're upstream, not downstream. Modern friendship might rely on likes and emojis, but in Victorian London, it's all side glances, secret alliances, and coded references to incidents involving hats, horses, or the scandalous misuse of lemon curd. Still, as you sip tea and trade stories, you're oddly grateful for the drama. In a city where the fog is thick and the days are long, friendship is both armor and entertainment. Besides, if you can survive London society together, you can probably survive anything, except maybe sharing a diary. Because in Victorian London, there's only one thing stronger than laudanum, and that's the urge to gossip about your friends before they gossip about you. It's time for a constitutional. You venture out, careful to step over puddles, beggars, and over-friendly men. If you walk fast enough, nobody will try to talk to you. If you walk too slow, you might get recruited for a temperance society. In Victorian London, the afternoon walk is less an act of leisure and more an elaborate, choreographed maneuver through a minefield of social hazards and literal horse manure. The city beckons, gray and mysterious, and the air is thick with the aromas of rain-soaked cobblestone, brewing coffee, and the ever-present undercurrent of regret. You tie your shawl tight, pin your bonnet at a daring angle, and step out into a world that is waiting to critique your posture. The sidewalks, such as they are, offer a helpful obstacle course. You dodge a pile of cabbages that escaped from a cart, nimbly sidestep a puddle that has aspirations to become a canal, and narrowly avoid being trampled by a parade of schoolchildren released on good behavior. You hop over a splatter of something best left unexamined. The only thing more treacherous than the footing is the social terrain. Walking with purpose is crucial. A woman seen loitering is a woman in need of intervention, either moral or medical. So you develop a pace. Not too fast, that's suspicious. Not too slow, that's an invitation. The London lady power strolls swift, determined, with an air of vague dissatisfaction. Your expression hovers between late for a funeral and just remembered I left the oven on. This, it turns out, is the sweet spot for minimal interruption. Still, interruptions are inevitable. A street preacher thrusts a pamphlet at you. Temperance is triumph, and you accept it with the air of someone who collects bad literature as a hobby. Next, you dodge a trio of elderly ladies, all wielding umbrellas like sabers, who eye your dress and whisper with the ferocity of a town crier. You feel the weight of their judgment on your hemline, your shawl, your soul. As you skirt the edge of the square, you pass a group of young men lingering by the lamppost, hats tipped rakishly, eyes scanning the street for eligible targets. You focus on the horizon. Victorian etiquette dictates that you may acknowledge them with a slight nod, but under no circumstances should you encourage conversation. Your internal mantra: don't make eye contact, don't smile, and for the love of all things lacy, don't trip. You encounter obstacles both animate and inanimate. A loose chicken, a very determined goose, and a poodle dressed as Napoleon. You nearly collide with a newsboy yelling the day's headlines, something about a scandal, a duel, and a lost shipment of turnips. You consider buying a paper, but last week's society page implied your shawl was of ambiguous moral character, and you're not ready to forgive. Despite the hazards, the walk is invigorating. Your cheeks flush with cold, your lungs fill with something approximating fresh air, and you allow yourself to imagine, just for a moment, that you are a woman of mystery on a secret mission, if that mission were to avoid stepping in anything with a discernible aroma. The park, when you reach it, offers a brief respite. Benches damp from morning rain, squirrels plotting insurrection, and elderly men arguing about the price of coal. You take a seat, careful to perch on the driest spot, and watch as London passes by, part spectacle, part cautionary tale. After a suitable interval, long enough to suggest vigorous health, short enough to avoid conversation, you rise, adjust your skirts, and retrace your steps home. You pass the same obstacles in reverse, nodding at Mrs. Witherspoon, who is always watching from her window, judging the speed, intent, and moral worth of every woman who dares to take the air alone. Returning home, slightly damp, slightly triumphant, you realize that the true skill of the afternoon walk isn't in avoiding mud or men. It's in returning with your dignity, your shoes, and your sense of humor mostly intact. Because in Victorian London, every walk is a test, and survival means never being slow enough to be evangelized or fast enough to be suspected of crime. No texting, just letters. You spend an hour crafting the perfect note to a suitor, eloquent, mysterious, and vague enough to be plausible deniability. You wait by the door for the post, surrounded by other people's bad poetry. The letter-writing ritual is an event. You sharpen your best pencil, the one with more graphite than splinters, and pull out a sheet of creamy, monogrammed stationery, borrowed from Henrietta, who will one day discover the missing pages and launch an inquest. You practice your penmanship, looping your L's and dotting your I's with calculated whimsy. The hardest part is the greeting, "Dearest Sir?" Too forward. "Respected Mr. Weatherby?" Too formal. "To whom I may be slightly interested, though not enough to damage my reputation?" Just right, but a bit long for an envelope. Composing the letter is like assembling a soufflé of emotions, a pinch of longing, a dash of irony, a generous dollop of ambiguity. You must reveal just enough to intrigue, but not enough to incriminate. The Victorians are masters of the slow burn. You find yourself constructing metaphors about the weather, the melancholy of autumn leaves, and the tragic brevity of daylight, all to imply that you are open to courtship without ever actually saying it. Should your intentions be discovered, you can always claim it was an innocent inquiry about his mother's health, delivered with unprecedented poetic flair. Once written, the letter must be sealed with the utmost care. There's a box of sealing wax and a signet ring that once belonged to your uncle, though the crest is so worn it could be a lion, a turnip, or possibly a worried duck. You drip the wax with trembling hands, press the seal, and admire the result. It looks mysterious, or sticky. It's hard to tell. Now comes the hardest part, the waiting. You perch anxiously near the front door, wrapped in your shawl, ears straining for the footsteps of the postman, a local celebrity known for his prodigious mustache and deep, abiding hatred of small dogs. The mail is a daily lottery. Sometimes it brings invitations, sometimes bills, sometimes letters meant for a different address entirely. You're still apologizing to Mr. Bartleby for last month's confusion involving a piglet and a birthday cake. Most days, it brings other people's heartbreak, their declarations of love, or their latest attempt at rhyming constancy with Wednesday. The parlor table groans under the weight of bad poetry and worse intentions. Henrietta has a secret admirer whose grasp of English is as tenuous as his penmanship. Josephine receives flowers from anonymous gentlemen, most of whom she claims to have never met. You remain skeptical. You read their letters for inspiration, but the only thing you gain is a renewed appreciation for the power of subtlety and the importance of spell check. Hours pass. The letter is gone, dispatched by the housemaid, who has probably read it twice and will almost certainly report any scandalous content to Mrs. Witherspoon by nightfall. Every creak on the landing is a potential reply. Every tap at the window, a possible pigeon post, here to deliver a message of passion, poetry, or outstanding debts. Eventually, a letter arrives. You recognize the handwriting, careful, considered, and just a little bit desperate. Your heart races as you break the seal, only to discover that your suitor has composed 3 stanzas about your melancholy gaze and a metaphor involving seashells that frankly raises more questions than it answers. You smile, tuck the letter away, and prepare your next reply, a balance of encouragement and cryptic phrasing. In Victorian London, courtship is a correspondence chess game, full of strategy, subtlety, and plausible deniability. And as you gaze out the window, awaiting tomorrow's post, you reflect. The real love story is between a girl and her ability to turn ambiguity into an art form. Let's talk about bathing. It's less a routine and more a logistical nightmare. The water's cold, the soap is suspect, and the entire household has a schedule that makes the Roman Empire look casual. It begins with optimism. You announce your intention to bathe as if declaring war, or at the very least, a bold diplomatic move. The housemaid raises her eyebrows. Henrietta mutters something about wasting perfectly good hot water. The cat flees. You try to ignore their skepticism and muster your courage. First comes the water. There's no convenient tap, just a collection of battered buckets and one leaky kettle. The water must be fetched from the scullery, boiled on the stove, then lugged, splash by agonizing splash, up 2 flights of stairs to the bathroom. By the time you've filled the tub enough to cover your ankles, you've either gained a new appreciation for Greek mythology or developed a mild hernia. The tub itself is a tin affair, somewhere between cozy and claustrophobic. It sits in the middle of the bathroom, daring you to climb in without slipping, squeaking, or flashing the neighbors through the thin muslin curtain. Steam curls up from the surface like a rare, precious ghost. The water's heat is fleeting, evaporating almost as soon as you undress, which you do at record speed. The moment you slide in, you realize you've made a terrible mistake. The water is only warm on top. Below, it's a bracing reminder that the Thames is just down the road and winter waits for no woman. Soap is next. A mysterious, misshapen bar of lavender and good intentions that promises to clean, refresh, and possibly remove the top layer of skin. Victorian soap is an adventure. Sometimes it smells faintly of flowers, sometimes of lie and despair. You scrub cautiously, trying to avoid the suspicious gray streak that might be coal dust, ancient mildew, or something best left unexamined. Privacy is relative. The door has no lock. At any moment, anyone, Henrietta, the housemaid, a visiting cousin, might burst in with an urgent request for the other half of the soap, or a commentary on your bathing technique. Etiquette demands that you sing loudly to announce occupancy, but your repertoire is limited to God. Save the Queen, and one verse of a song about rutabagas. Of course, there's a schedule. The entire household has dibs on the bath, each with a preferred time slot, and each slot fiercely guarded. Heaven help the woman who overruns her time. The knock at the door starts polite, then shifts to threatening, then finally, to a chorus of complaints about how some people simply can't think of anyone but themselves. You do mental arithmetic. If you soak for 8 more minutes, you'll earn a week of passive-aggressive silence at dinner. 6 minutes, and you're just selfish. 4, and you're very modern, which is both an insult and a warning. Rinsing your hair is an ordeal. There is no shampoo, only soap and a bowl of cold water to dump over your head. You emerge, gasping, dripping, and mildly traumatized, clutching the towel, thin, slightly damp, probably last laundered during the last Jubilee. The window fogs up. The cat stares with open contempt. By the time you're dry, your skin is pink, your hair is frizzing, and you feel simultaneously invigorated and exhausted. You have survived Victorian hygiene. Your reward? The entire household will make comments for the rest of the day about how you smell like a French boudoir and probably caught your death. Just wait. As you slip back into your petticoats and shawl, you vow not to attempt this again until summer, or until you forget, once more, just how complicated getting clean can be. In Victorian London, bathing isn't just a luxury. It's an act of bravery, a negotiation, and a family event you'd rather no one attended. Every respectable lady knows about the place in the basement. Plush cushions, heavy drapes, and the unmistakable scent of poppy smoke. You descend the stairs and immediately forget what you were worrying about. The journey begins with a creak of the narrow staircase, each step carrying you further from the respectable parlor and closer to the realm of velvet shadows and hushed voices. The world above is all rules and rigid spines. Down here, you can finally exhale. The air is warm and thick, perfumed with incense, tobacco, and the persistent sweetness of something slightly illegal. The gaslights flicker dimly, casting everything in a haze that's equal parts decadent and questionable. Inside, the den is a patchwork of discarded slippers and elegant slippers. strangers lounging on couches that have probably seen more intrigue than the entire House of Lords. The walls are hidden behind burgundy curtains and Chinese screens, designed to let in just enough mystery and not a single ray of the gray London sun. If you look closely, you'll notice embroidery on the cushions, delicate, amateurish flowers, probably stitched by someone who needed a distraction from their existential ennui. A low table holds a veritable buffet of glass pipes, ornate tins, and ceramic bowls. There's always someone, usually a poet or an aristocrat or both, demonstrating the art of proper inhalation as if it were a subject at finishing school. The housemaid pretends not to know, but she sometimes leaves fresh matches by the door, just in case the fire of self-discovery needs a little help. You settle onto a cushion, adjusting your skirts so you look comfortably tragic, as is the fashion. Someone passes you a pipe with the casual elegance of a woman who's solved all her problems with botany. You hesitate for show, then take a measured breath. The first taste is bitter, floral, and strange, like kissing a rose that's been reading depressing Russian novels. Instantly, the room melts at the edges, all your worries drifting off with the blue-gray smoke. Around you, conversation hums in waves, voices discussing everything from colonial politics to the merits of different Parisian tailors. Occasionally, someone breaks into song. Once in a while, a debate erupts over which translation of Confucius is least likely to make your brain itch. Nobody listens for long. The air here is made for forgetting. Time loses its grip. You watch the patterns in the carpet shift and dance, half convinced the rug is reciting poetry just for you. In the corner, Henrietta is draped across a chaise like a Renaissance muse, muttering about lost love and the mysterious allure of Turkish delight. The poet, there's always a poet, has composed 4 verses and misplaced his shoes. You contemplate joining the conversation, but the pillows are so soft, the smoke so hypnotic, that it's hard to do anything except smile languidly and hope someone brings more biscuits. Here, nobody cares if you forgot to hem your skirt or if you can't remember the difference between a simile and a scandal. Reputations are checked at the top of the stairs. Down here, the only thing that matters is the slow unraveling of tension, the camaraderie of the comfortably numb, and the belief, utterly unshakable, that life outside can wait a few more hours. Eventually, the hour grows late, and reality, like an unwelcome relative, creeps in. You rise, brush the crumbs of someone else's poetry from your shawl, and return to the staircase, heart and mind considerably lighter than when you arrived. Because in Victorian London, every lady needs a place where she can forget her worries, listen to a little bad poetry, and float through the fog for just one more night. Nothing sobers you up faster than a letter from Aunt Mildred. She's heard rumors. She's concerned. She recommends cold baths, hard work, and marrying a curate. You briefly consider joining a circus. The letter always arrives in a thick cream envelope, sealed with enough wax to warrant its own candlestick. You recognize Aunt Mildred's handwriting instantly, an angular script that suggests she could etch her opinions directly onto granite if necessary. You steel yourself, break the seal, and brace for impact. The missive is exactly as expected. Formal greetings, thinly veiled warnings, and a postscript about the moral failings of your generation. Aunt Mildred has a sixth sense for anything remotely unorthodox. If you so much as change your hairstyle or skip a church supper, she'll receive word before the clock strikes noon. Her network of informants stretches across the city: relatives, acquaintances, stray clergymen, and Mrs. Witherspoon, the neighborhood's self-appointed guardian of decency. Together, they form an intelligence operation that could rival Scotland Yard, fueled by the unholy power of boredom and lemon scones. Her letters always follow a predictable pattern. First, the opening salvo, an inquiry about your health. Are you taking your cod liver oil? Quickly followed by a concern about your social choices. Then comes the parade of recommendations. Cold baths, to invigorate the mind and soul. Vigorous cleaning, idle hands breed mischief. And, inevitably, the suggestion that you find a nice, humble curate and settle into a life of piety and sensible shoes. Sometimes she encloses a clipping from the Temperance Gazette, a pamphlet about the dangers of gin, or a recipe for marrow broth that seems to double as a threat. You read her words with a sinking sense of inevitability. According to Aunt Mildred, your current lifestyle, tea, gossip, the occasional laudanum biscuit, can only lead to ruin. She references distant cousins who once tried to live bohemian lives. The cautionary tales always end with a faded photograph, a tragic haircut, or a mysterious trip to Brighton for the air. You sigh, fold the letter, and contemplate a reply. The art of responding to Aunt Mildred is a balancing act. You must appear grateful for her wisdom, promise to consider her advice, and offer just enough mundane detail to convince her that you have no time for moral decline. Dear Aunt, thank you for your suggestions. I have taken 3 cold baths this week, only fainted once, and now have a healthy respect for icy water and the futility of clean living. The curate, sadly, is already engaged to a woman who enjoys hymnals and gardening. You wonder briefly if life would be easier in the circus. There's a certain appeal to vanishing into a world of sequins, elephants, and daily death-defying stunts, none of which require keeping up with Aunt Mildred's correspondence. You picture yourself balancing on a high wire, waving to the crowd, blissfully free from lectures about the virtues of scrubbing floors and dating clergy. But alas, you are bound by duty. Victorian family ties are stronger than steel, reinforced by guilt and endless cake. Aunt Mildred's approval is currency, and her disapproval is a tax paid in sighs and long afternoons spent darning socks while reflecting on your failings. You seek solace in the parlor, sharing the letter with Henrietta and Josephine, who each have their own Aunt Mildred analogues. One writes in Latin, the other in aggressive haiku. Together, you swap horror stories, trade avoidance strategies, and toast your shared survival with tepid tea. Because in Victorian London, family doesn't just keep you grounded, they hold you under until you promise to behave. And as you tuck Aunt Mildred's letter into the desk with the others, you decide you'll stick with your current path for now. The curate can wait. The circus will always be there. And cold baths, like Aunt Mildred's advice, are best endured in small doses, with plenty of towels and a strong cup of tea. There's a knock at the door. Is it the landlord, the constable, or just an enthusiastic street preacher? In Victorian London, you're never more than 2 blocks from legal trouble or unsolicited advice. You freeze mid-sip, teacup poised, heart skipping a beat. The knock repeats, firm, official, tinged with the urgency of someone whose boots are definitely muddy. Henrietta glances at you with that look. Are you expecting someone? You are not. You are, in fact, hoping to go your entire life without ever expecting anyone again, especially not someone who knocks with authority. You consider ignoring it. But in this city, that's just an invitation for them to shout through the letterbox or, worse, peek through the windows. You smooth your skirts, compose your face into its most innocent expression you've practiced in the mirror, and open the door just a crack, enough to see, not enough to confess. It's a constable, or perhaps a landlord in a borrowed hat. The distinction can be subtle, and both are capable of inspiring terror. He asks if you're the lady of the house, as if there's a danger the house itself might reply. You nod, thinking through your mental checklist. Rent paid, window not broken. This week. Absolutely no illegal gambling dens in the parlor, unless you count Tuesday poetry readings. He inquires about a missing chicken. You deny all knowledge, as anyone would even if you had recently seen a feather in Byron the cat's whiskers. He eyes your shopping basket, a pastry, a bottle of hair tonic, and a slightly suspicious loaf of bread, with the suspicion of a man who's seen too much yeast-based crime. In Victorian London, the law is everywhere. It's not just the constables with their shiny boots and impressively bushy sideburns. It's the city's endless array of street inspectors, sanitary officials, licensing agents, and volunteer temperance enforcers, all ready to pounce if you so much as jaywalk, spit, or fail to produce a license for your third best umbrella. Then there's the paperwork. Permits for everything: owning a dog, selling a pie, holding a public meeting, and, presumably, breathing in more than your fair share of oxygen. You're expected to produce receipts at a moment's notice, and you live in constant fear that one of your aunts has accidentally registered you as a purveyor of unregulated jam. Sometimes it's not the law at all. Sometimes it's a street preacher, full of righteous energy and pamphlets, determined to save your soul whether you want it or not. He presses a handbill into your palm, urging you to renounce gin and embrace the temperance movement. You smile, nod, and quietly tuck the pamphlet behind a loose brick for the next unsuspecting tenant. The real risk, though, is the gossip police, those unofficial enforcers of Victorian morality, led by Mrs. Witherspoon and her squadron of curtain twitchers. A late-night guest, a missing handkerchief, a laugh that carries too far down the street. Any of these can land you in the court of public opinion, where sentences are harsh and appeals unheard. You sigh with relief as the constable tips his hat and moves on, presumably to interrogate someone else about poultry. You close the door, only to find a summons from the landlord shoved under the mat. It's about the state of the curtains, which apparently constitutes a minor infraction against the empire. Back inside, you recount the ordeal to Henrietta and Josephine, who listen with a mixture of horror and admiration. They've had their own run-ins. Edith was once nearly arrested for excessive millinery, while Josephine survived a 3-day manhunt after a misunderstanding involving a borrowed bicycle and the mayor's nephew. In Victorian London, you quickly learn to keep your receipts, your stories straight, and your pastries out of sight. The law is everywhere, but so is your ability to look innocent at a moment's notice. Because here, being a gentlewoman isn't just about manners and morals. It's about surviving the endless parade of knocks, questions, and accusations, and always having a plausible alibi for every missing chicken. Sick again? The pharmacist has just the thing: a syrup containing 6 kinds of opiate, 2 types of alcohol, and a drawing of a pineapple for luck. You're not sure if it's working, but you're certainly not anxious anymore. The journey to health in Victorian London begins, as all great adventures do, with a cough that sounds like you've swallowed a gravel path, and a feverish dream in which you're chased by a particularly judgmental aunt. You drag yourself to the apothecary, a shop that smells of licorice, liniment, and just a touch of panic, where every shelf is lined with glass bottles promising relief, vitality, or at least a cheerful stupor. You describe your symptoms: sore throat, cold toes, vague malaise, existential dread. The pharmacist, a man with whiskers so bushy they could be declared a fire hazard, nods sagely. He consults a vast ledger filled with recipes that would alarm a modern toxicologist. There's a syrup for every affliction: neuralgia, the vapors, excessive melancholy, and the ever-mysterious female complaint. Most of them have 3 things in common. They are sticky, they taste like despair, and they are approximately 70% ethanol by volume. He measures a glug of this, a dash of that, and hands you a bottle with a label that reads, in beautiful calligraphy, Dr. Murgatroyd's Vital Elixir and General Restorative, now with pineapple essence. Number A. The pineapple is illustrated with a smile. You're not sure if the bottle contains actual fruit, but at this point, anything is possible. Back home, you pour a teaspoonful and brace for impact. The taste is complex. There are notes of burnt caramel, bitter root, maybe a hint of sadness, and the unmistakable tingle of something that probably isn't legal in future centuries. You feel a warm glow spread from your tongue to your fingertips. Your cough subsides, your toes tingle. The world blurs pleasantly at the edges. It's not just syrup. The Victorian medicine cabinet is an alchemist's playground. Arsenic wafers for the complexion, mercury for stubborn sores, electric belts for nervousness, and mustard plasters for everything from gout to heartbreak. If you can swallow it, rub it, or stick it under your pillow, someone has tried to sell it as a cure. There are quack doctors, of course. Men in tall hats peddling powders that promise eternal youth, full hair, and, occasionally, invisibility. You once purchased a tonic said to guarantee a cheerful disposition. It worked, mainly because you spent the next 2 days asleep on the swooning couch. Some cures are more interactive. Leeches for fever, cupping for congestion, trepanning for when all else fails, though you'd rather keep your skull intact. Thank you. Friends offer home remedies, raw onion poultices, garlic necklaces, and a tea made from the dried petals of a flower that only blooms when everyone's lost hope. You try them all, out of desperation and a vague belief that suffering builds character. And then there are the advertisements. Posters promising miraculous recovery in 3 days, testimonials from mysterious foreigners with suspiciously perfect teeth, and, always, the reminder that if you don't improve, it's probably your fault for not believing hard enough in the cure. Despite it all, you survive. The cough fades, the color returns to your cheeks, and you start to suspect that half the magic is simply the comfort of being cared for, even if the care is mainly narcotics and decorative fruit. As you tuck your bottle of pineapple elixir away for the next inevitable relapse, you reflect that in Victorian London, the difference between a marvel and a mistake is mostly luck, a strong stomach, and the ability to enjoy a nap at any time of day. And, if nothing else, at least you're too relaxed now to worry about it. You decide to write your memoirs, Confessions of a London Lady of Leisure. You get as far as the table of contents before running out of ink, ideas, and motivation. It begins with a burst of optimism and a new quill. You envision yourself as the next great chronicler of Victorian life, destined for dusty libraries and whispered admiration at tea parties. You arrange your writing implements just so: a sheaf of slightly crumpled paper, a bottle of ink the color of midnight, with a suspicious crust at the rim, and a book of inspirational quotes by Mrs. Gaskell. Byron the cat immediately claims the best spot on the desk, sprawling across your paper and radiating the smug confidence of a feline who has never failed to finish a story. You start strong. Table of contents. A brief but necessary introduction. The tragedy of my wardrobe. Hopes, dreams, and acceptable biscuits. A list of all the times I have nearly died from ennui. And that's where it ends. The rest of the page is a series of ink blots and idle sketches. A hat, a teacup, something that may or may not be Henrietta being chased by a goose. Inspiration, once so promising, now slinks out the door. You stare out the window, searching for a muse among the pigeons fighting over a crust of bread on the sill. You contemplate starting with childhood, but the only memory that surfaces is the year you accidentally glued your hair to a chair during a craft experiment gone wrong. Hardly the origin story of a literary icon. You try to write about your daily routine, but quickly realize that woke up, drank tea, avoided Aunt Mildred's advice, considered joining a convent, declined, took a nap does not make for a riveting narrative. You attempt to embellish, adding a subplot about a secret identity as a jewel thief, but Byron, the cat, knocks over the ink bottle in protest, effectively editing the story to an inky smudge. Writer's block descends like a Victorian fog, thick, impenetrable, and vaguely judgmental. Henrietta pokes her head in, offering unsolicited suggestions. Just write what you know, dear. What you know, at this point, is how to avoid chores, and the best places to hide a flask of medicinal brandy. Hardly the stuff of timeless literature. You flip through other memoirs for inspiration. Lady Thornby's Adventures in Corset Lacing is mostly diagrams. The Reverend's My Life Among the Pious is as lively as a bowl of cold porridge. You glance at your empty page, contemplating whether to fill it with recipes, weather observations, or a passionate essay on the criminal underuse of velvet in society. You attempt a love scene, but halfway through, you forget the name of your imaginary suitor and have to replace him with Mr. X, who spends the rest of the chapter silently judging you for plot inconsistencies. You try again, only to be interrupted by the sound of the street musicians playing the same waltz for the 12th day in a row, driving all thoughts from your head except the urgent desire for quiet. Eventually, you surrender. The page remains mostly blank, save for a doodle of a swooning couch and a confession that reads, Chapter 1. I meant well. You hide the paper at the back of your drawer, vowing to finish it tomorrow, or the next day, or perhaps when Queen Victoria herself takes up the pen. For now, you decide that living through your story is accomplishment enough. After all, Every day you manage to avoid scandal, starvation, and the advances of men named Neville is a minor victory. And in Victorian London, sometimes the bravest act is simply surviving the day, with or without a memoir. Love in Victorian London is complicated. Courtship involves secret glances, coded fans, and the occasional fainting spell. You fall for a poet who lives in his mother's attic and spends all his money on cravats. The first time you meet, it's at a soiree in Bloomsbury, a dimly lit drawing room heavy with incense, violin music, and the ever-present threat of a spontaneous lecture on phrenology. He is leaning against the mantel, hair artfully tousled, discussing the tragic symbolism of fog. You're immediately enchanted, though later you'll blame the laudanum biscuits for your lapse in judgment. Victorian courtship is never straightforward. He offers you a poem, handwritten on the back of a laundry bill. The poem is passionate, indecipherable, and, upon close inspection, partially plagiarized from a shipping forecast. Nevertheless, you are moved. You slip him a reply, hidden within the folds of your handkerchief. It reads, "My heart is like a velvet sofa, frequently sat upon, but rarely appreciated." He responds by reciting Byron in your general direction, then apologizing for being overcome by the agony of modern existence. Your friends are divided. Henrietta swoons at the mention of a poet. They're always tragic, dear, and tragedy is so fashionable. Josephine is skeptical, noting that men who quote Keats rarely remember birthdays or bring their own money to the opera. You ignore them. What is love without a little healthy delusion? The courtship unfolds in fits and starts, always under the cover of darkness and propriety. Letters are exchanged by way of street urchins and cooperative cab drivers. You meet for strolls in the park, where you discuss the finer points of existential despair and how best to fake a cough for dramatic effect. Occasionally, he presents you with small tokens, a wilted flower, a book with the first 30 pages missing, a lock of hair he claims is his. You suspect it's from the family dog. There are obstacles, naturally. His mother, a woman of imposing stature and unyielding opinions, regards you as a distraction from his literary genius. She refers to you exclusively as the person with the unfortunate hat. Your own relatives are equally unhelpful, forwarding pamphlets on the dangers of bohemian living and strongly suggesting an alliance with a nice, stable curate. Dates, such as they are, consist of sitting side by side in gaslit parlors, pretending not to notice the flickering shadows and the faint smell of damp. He recites verse. You nod thoughtfully, hoping you look mysterious and not simply sleepy. Sometimes he attempts to write sonnets in your honor, but usually ends up bemoaning the price of paper or the tragic state of his favorite waistcoat. You briefly consider a dramatic elopement, but reality intrudes. He is chronically broke, you are chronically sensible, and both of you know that running away together would result in 1 week of bliss and 6 months of arguing over the grocery bill. Instead, you settle for a romance conducted mostly in your imagination, with the occasional awkward encounter at the lending library. The relationship eventually fades, as most do, with a whimper rather than a bang. He writes you a final poem, 4 pages of existential angst and a coffee stain. You keep it for posterity, along with the laundry bill, the wilted flower, and the growing suspicion that romance is best experienced from a safe distance, ideally while reclining on a swooning couch. You reflect, as you sip tea with Henrietta and Josephine, that love in Victorian London is a lot like gaslight. It flickers, it flatters, and if you get too close, it might make you dizzy. But at least it makes for a good story, one you can embellish for years to come. As evening descends, the city transforms. Street lamps flicker, horses clatter, and distant arguments drift up from the pub. You draw the curtains, light a candle, and pretend you don't hear the landlord shouting. Soho at night is a symphony, though not the elegant kind played in candlelit salons. This is the orchestration of a city determined to stay awake and slightly unruly. The air is thick with the scent of roasting chestnuts, cigar smoke, and the indefinable tang of 1,000 unsolved mysteries. Downstairs, the landlord continues his nightly performance, a sonorous medley of complaints about the rent, the plumbing, and the mysterious disappearance of all the good teaspoons. You ignore him with the skill of a seasoned professional, grateful for walls thick enough to muffle only the smallest of grievances. You settle in by the window, peering out through a pane fogged by the combined efforts of breath, candlelight, and atmospheric gloom. The streets below are awash in golden gaslight, which makes even the mud look romantic. Shadows pass. A trio of costermongers wheeling barrows home. A pair of lovers walking arm in arm. The occasional stray cat, possibly Byron. Possibly just a cat with the same air of mild disdain. Above the clamor, a street musician plucks out a mournful tune on a battered violin. His hat, placed for donations, gathers coins, and, occasionally, an encouraging potato. The song changes tempo as the pub down the street erupts, first in laughter, then in disagreement, then in a brawl that is equal parts choreography and public service announcement. The sound of breaking glass is punctuated by cheers, jeers, and the landlord's renewed interest in being heard. You can almost chart the neighborhood's personalities by their evening routines. Mrs. Witherspoon peers through her curtains, recording the comings and goings in her ever-expanding book of sins. The O'Malley twins attempt to sneak out for a midnight adventure, only to be thwarted by their mother's strategic placement of a potted fern. Josephine plays the piano, valiantly attempting God. Save the Queen, while Henrietta critiques her tempo from the sofa. Every window glows with possibility. Parties in full swing, quiet dinners, solitary souls scribbling letters by lamplight. Occasionally, the gas lamps sputter and flicker, casting monsters on the walls, though most of the city's monsters are simply people in ill-fitting coats, looking for a late-night meat pie, or a friend who owes them money. Inside, you try to make your room as inviting as possible. You light the good candle, the one that smells faintly of lavender, not the one that smells of melted hope and old shoes. You settle under a blanket with your book and a biscuit, reading by a pool of golden light as the world outside moves in unpredictable, lively circles. The cat returns, Byron, this time for certain, leaping onto your lap with muddy paws and the air of one who has seen too much. You stroke his head, grateful for his warmth, his indifference, and his uncanny knack for pretending nothing is ever your fault. Eventually, the city's noise softens to a background hum. Footsteps fading, doors slamming, the last chorus from the pub. Soho's heart keeps beating, wild and undeterred. The candle flickers lower. You sip tea, listening to the night, half drifting on the lull of distant revelry and your own exhaustion. And as you finally close your eyes, you realize, for all its racket and rough edges, nightfall in Soho has its own peculiar comfort. The chaos is a lullaby, the shadows are old friends, and in the midst of it all, you are safe, unseen, and oddly at peace. Until, of course, the landlord starts up again at dawn. But that's a tomorrow problem. Sleep doesn't come easy. The shadows are long, the blankets are thin, and someone is definitely crying 2 rooms over. You consider a midnight biscuit, then remember you finished them yesterday. Your bed, a sagging contraption of springs and straw, protests every shift with the groan of a haunted ship. You pull the covers tighter, but they seem to have shrunk since last winter, a phenomenon you suspect is less physics and more Henrietta borrowing them for her own nightly fortification. Somewhere, the wind whistles through a crack in the window frame, rattling a teacup on your dresser and whispering rumors of pneumonia. You close your eyes and try to drift off, counting sheep, carriages, or the number of times you've promised yourself an early night. But Soho's nighttime chorus conspires against you. A dog barking in the alley, a distant piano thumping out waltzes, and the clop of late-night cab horses returning their drunken fares. Above it all, Byron the cat circles 3 times before settling on your feet like a sandbag, a small mercy on a cold night. The problem isn't just the noise, it's the mind's refusal to cooperate. Your brain is a theater after dark, staging scenes you'd never buy a ticket for, missed appointments, angry relatives, that time you spilled gravy on a duchess's shoe, and the universal anxiety of whether you'll ever find matching gloves again. There's a special kind of Victorian insomnia, fueled by worry, weak tea, and all the things you meant to say but didn't, now returning for a midnight encore. You think about snacks. A biscuit would be ideal, something to soak up anxiety and distract from the howling void. But the tin is empty, save for a few crumbs and the faint scent of ginger. You briefly consider sneaking downstairs, but the memory of the landlord's creaking floorboards and his lectures about unauthorized snacking keep you tucked under the covers. You imagine inventing a new kind of midnight meal, something discreet and restorative, but the best you can manage is a sip of tepid water from the glass by your bed and a half-hearted wish for better times. Nighttime brings dreams, sometimes sweet, sometimes peculiar. You've soared over London in a balloon made of handkerchiefs, only to crash land in a pastry shop run by Aunt Mildred. You've attended a royal ball wearing only your underclothes and a truly impressive hat. Sometimes you are simply yourself, trying to explain the meaning of life to a skeptical parlor full of ducks. You wake, heart pounding, and reach instinctively for the biscuits that aren't there. The nightmares are just as creative. In one, Mrs. Witherspoon accuses you of moral decay in front of all of Soho. In another, you're lost in a maze of endless tea parties, desperately searching for the loo. Often, you simply relive the minor humiliations of the day, but with the stakes raised, the grocer is the queen, the cat is a judge, and the biscuits are on trial for their very existence. Eventually, exhaustion wins. Your thoughts unravel, one by one, until even the landlord's late-night mutterings become background noise. Byron purrs, your feet finally warm. The thin blanket seems, for one blessed moment, just enough. Tomorrow will bring new adventures, new snacks, and perhaps, if you remember to hide the tin, an actual biscuit or two for midnight emergencies. Until then, you let yourself drift, comforted by the fact that, in Victorian London, sleeplessness is as universal as the fog, and dreams are the one thing nobody can ration or regulate. You finally slip into a half-sleep, ready to face whatever oddities your subconscious has planned next. And if you wake up at 3 a.m. hungry, at least you'll have a new story to add to your ever-growing collection of nocturnal complaints. Victorian life is about appearances. You perfect the skill of staring thoughtfully at nothing, making everyone assume you're deeply engaged in spiritual reflection. Secretly, you're just counting ceiling cracks. It's an art form, really. You arrange yourself by the window, hands folded, face angled toward the light just so. The trick is to hold a book in your lap, preferably something hefty, like moral sentiments and modest puddings, even if you never get past the preface. You occasionally turn a page with deliberate slowness, as though each sentence holds the secrets of the universe. In reality, you're watching a fly attempt the world's smallest loop-de-loop on the windowsill. Your family and visitors are impressed. So diligent, Aunt Mildred remarks. So deep, says Josephine, peering at your blank expression. Little do they know, you're inventing an elaborate backstory for the fly. He's a widower, 3 children, dreams of becoming a moth. You nod thoughtfully at nothing in particular, all while mentally composing a shopping list and remembering every embarrassing thing you've said since 1848. Victorian society thrives on the illusion of productivity. It's not enough to be. You must appear to be, preferably in a way that makes everyone else feel vaguely inadequate. You master the art of strategic sighing, a gentle fluttering of the eyelashes, and the ability to look inspired by a patch of peeling wallpaper. When Henrietta bursts in, demanding to know what you're thinking, you simply murmur, "Oh, just pondering the transience of joy," and she backs away in awe. The parlor is your stage. You rearrange the pillows with a seriousness that would put a military parade to shame. You spend 15 minutes adjusting the folds of your shawl, then another 10 considering which expression best communicates. I'm wrestling with important philosophical dilemmas. Occasionally, you pick up your embroidery, jab the needle into the same square inch of cloth 20 times, then sigh as if burdened by the weight of artistic genius. When truly ambitious, you tackle the garden. Armed with a trowel and an unshakable sense of futility, you spend an hour repositioning one slightly confused geranium. Your neighbors, spying over the fence, assume you're conducting important botanical research. In truth, you're just avoiding Mrs. Witherspoon's latest attempt to organize a charitable committee for the proper rehabilitation of fallen vegetables. Tea time offers another opportunity. You stare into your cup, swirling the dregs, making it appear as though you're reading the future in the leaves. You're not. You're just wondering if there's any cake left, and calculating how long you can avoid starting the laundry. Henrietta praises your air of mystery. The cat, meanwhile, has mastered the pose of existential crisis and earns twice as much attention for half the effort. Sometimes you feign a headache. You press a hand to your brow, eyes half closed, listening to the world through the filter of invented suffering. The housemaid tiptoes by. Josephine brings you a compress. The truth is, you're just enjoying a moment of uninterrupted nothingness, savoring the rarest of luxuries, being still, being quiet, and not being asked to dust the library. In Victorian London, this is survival. You cultivate the art of the vacant gaze and the empty page. You develop the ability to look tragic in a sunbeam, thoughtful beside a potted fern, and inspired by the distant clanging of a neighbor's saucepan. You become, in short, a master of looking busy while achieving absolutely nothing at all. And if anyone asks what you're doing, you simply respond with a faint smile, "I'm living in the present," which, of course, is the busiest kind of nothing there is. Let's discuss fashion weapons. Your hat pins are not just decorative, they're your first line of defense. You once nearly started a duel at a milliner's over a misplaced feather. No regrets. In Victorian London, a woman's hat is more than a statement, it's a battleground. Every accessory tells a story, but the hat pin is pure poetry in steel. You own 8, each with its own history, personality, and probable body count. They glitter in the sunlight, catching the eye, and occasionally, the unsuspecting hand of anyone foolish enough to try adjusting your bonnet without express permission. The millinery shops are war zones. Picture it, a dozen women, 100 hats, and exactly one ostrich feather that everyone swears matches their complexion. The duel you nearly started wasn't over honor or family, but over plumage, an argument so fierce even the shopkeeper retreated behind the counter, clutching her tape measure like a crucifix. Hatpins flashed. Elbows were thrown. In the end, you emerged victorious, feather in place, only a little bit of lace ruffled in the melee. Hatpins serve many purposes in your daily life. They anchor your hat in the teeth of the fiercest London wind, fend off unwanted advances from overconfident cabbies, and once, memorably, rescued a crumpet from a stubborn toaster. They also double as impromptu letter openers, embroidery tools, and, on particularly dramatic days, pointers for emphasizing your side of an argument about whether mauve is a real color or an elaborate joke played on the English by the French. They are also a symbol. Victorian society may expect women to be delicate and demure, but there's a reason every respectable lady is armed with 6 inches of sharpened steel. On the omnibus, a hatpin is worth more than a chaperone. In the crush of the market, it's the only thing standing between you and a rogue pickpocket. Or Mrs. Witherspoon's attempt to adjust your hat for the 3rd time this week. Your friends have their own stories. Henrietta once brandished her hatpin at a street musician who tried to serenade her with a questionable ballad. Josephine used hers to sign her name in the guest book at a particularly boring wedding. The housemaid, after a close encounter with an aggressive goose, now refers to hatpins as those little sticks what saved me from certain doom. There's talk in Parliament, of course, about regulating hatpins. Too sharp, too dangerous, too prone to inciting hatpin hysteria. Pamphlets are circulated, editorials are written. Should ladies carry weapons? Asks one. Hatpins, menace or modern marvel? Demands another. The men fret, but the women just smile, tapping their hats in silent solidarity. You polish your pins every Sunday, lining them up on the dressing table like a miniature arsenal. Each one is unique. A pearl-tipped beauty for weddings, a garnet one for funerals, and a plain utilitarian pin for days when you expect trouble. You keep a spare tucked in your bodice, just in case negotiations turn hostile at the bakery. Of course, hatpins aren't all about defense. Sometimes they're just the finishing touch, a flash of silver or gold that transforms your hat from acceptable to potentially legendary. You experiment with arrangements, clustered, fanned, angled to suggest nonchalance or quiet threat. Victorian fashion is a language, and your hat pins are the exclamation points. So, the next time someone questions the necessity of 8 different hat pins, you simply smile and recount the saga of the feather at Madame Dupont's. No regrets, indeed. Because in Victorian London, the line between fashion and survival is sharp, and if you're doing it right, exquisitely accessorized. Disaster strikes. You're out of laudanum. You consider switching to herbal tea, but it's not the same. You write a poem about your suffering. The cat is unimpressed. It's a crisis worthy of its own chapter in the family annals. The familiar brown bottle is empty, save for a sticky residue and a faint whiff of poppy and regret. You shake it, just in case, but not even a single drop remains. The implications are staggering. Suddenly, every ache is sharper, every sigh heavier, and the world seems a little less poetic, a little more Victorian. First, you attempt denial. Maybe there's another bottle, tucked behind the biscuits or hidden under the settee. You scour every shelf and drawer, discovering only dust, old buttons, and a single withered raisin. Henrietta, sensing your distress, suggests valerian drops. Josephine offers to make her famous soothing tisane, a blend of chamomile, mint, and a suspiciously large amount of brandy. You drink it anyway, but it only reminds you of the glory days when your nerves could be calmed by something with a skull and crossbones on the label. Withdrawal sets in, not with shaking or visions, that comes later, but with a creeping sense of boredom and melodrama. You spend the afternoon composing verses of agony. Alas, my soul, deprived of rest, my nerves, unraveled and unblessed. No laudanum, no velvet dream, just tepid tea and cold moonbeam. Byron the cat, your usual partner in melancholy, yawns extravagantly and bats at your pen. He, at least, has no need for artificial comfort, being constitutionally immune to the anxieties of polite society and the opinions of Aunt Mildred. You consider alternatives. Herbal tea is soothing, yes, but where's the edge? Where's the thrill? You attempt a ginger biscuit. It's crunchy, reassuring, and entirely incapable of erasing existential dread. You think about brisk exercise, as recommended by every magazine and Aunt Mildred herself, but decide that pacing dramatically across the parlor while clutching your shawl should count for at least half a mile. Evening arrives. The shadows grow long. You feel every creak in the house, every echo of the landlord's complaints about rent and noise. Henrietta suggests distraction, charades, a spirited debate on the superiority of scones over crumpets, or, her last resort, a group reading of practical etiquette for the modern lady. You almost miss the dull comfort of laudanum-induced indifference. At some point, you attempt to meditate, following the instructions in a borrowed pamphlet from Mrs. Witherspoon's Society for Restoring Moral Fortitude. You close your eyes, breathe deeply, and last 3 minutes before being overcome by the urge to rearrange the furniture. Surely, if you can't find inner peace, you can at least achieve a better angle for the settee. As night deepens, you reflect on your predicament. Maybe this is character building. Maybe tomorrow you'll wake with newfound clarity, ready to embrace a life of sobriety and herbal infusions. Or maybe you'll send a desperate note to the apothecary at first light, willing to barter your last hatpin for a bottle of anything ending in NG. Until then, you cope the only way a Victorian lady can, by being excessively dramatic about the whole thing, sighing at inopportune moments, and composing poetry that would horrify Tennyson. The cat, unsympathetic, settles on your lap and begins to purr. He doesn't understand the tragedy of an empty bottle, but he does appreciate the warmth and the gentle petting that inevitably follows a personal crisis. In the end, you drift off, unmedicated but not unloved, clutching your cold teacup and planning tomorrow's journey to the apothecary. Because in Victorian London, disaster is just another opportunity to practice your flair for the melodramatic and maybe to finally finish that poem. The night ends with plans for tomorrow. Maybe you'll visit the park Or maybe you'll read the newspaper and imagine what it's like to live in a city that doesn't smell like boiled cabbage and regret. Either way, you'll probably survive, as long as the opium holds out. Lying in bed, you let your mind wander through the various possibilities that tomorrow might bring. The possibilities are endless, provided they involve activities within a 2-mile radius and don't require an umbrella with both ribs intact. Perhaps you'll stroll down to Hyde Park, wrap your shawl around your shoulders, and take in the spectacle of ducks fighting over crumbs like tiny, feathered capitalists. Or perhaps you'll simply observe the view from your window, watching the parade of umbrella-toting Londoners as they attempt to navigate another day's worth of drizzle and disappointment. You briefly consider rising early, a bold move, and making the most of the fresh morning air. But you remember that fresh is Victorian code for less polluted than usual, but still tastes faintly of soot and ancient cheese. If you do go out, you'll have to brace yourself for the park's formidable squirrels, which have organized themselves into a minor militia and may attempt to extort payment in ginger nuts. If it rains, as it inevitably will, you'll stay inside and attempt to be productive. Maybe you'll try to finish that embroidery you started 2 winters ago, the one that's slowly transforming from a rose into a sort of abstract expression of confusion. Or you'll open the newspaper, determined to keep up with the world's events, only to be derailed by another editorial about the dangers of dancing or the tragic rise of left-handedness. You think about visiting friends. There's always Josephine, who welcomes visitors with tea, scandal, and a small dog named Hercules that likes to bite ankles. Or Henrietta, who'll insist you try her new nerve tonic, a concoction of herbs and optimism that tastes suspiciously like pond water and does nothing for your nerves except confuse them. You make a mental note to avoid Aunt Mildred at all costs, should she make one of her surprise visits. There's only so much advice about cold baths and suitable clergymen you can bear before retreating back into the safety of your own slightly musty parlor. Of course, the biggest challenge of tomorrow is always the same, simply getting through the day. Victorian London doesn't make it easy. The streets are unpredictable, the neighbors nosy, and there's always the risk of running into someone eager to discuss the virtues of cod liver oil. But you have your coping mechanisms: a sensible shawl, a sturdy hat pin, and of course, just enough opium to keep the worst of reality at bay. As you plan, you're struck by a quiet resilience. No matter how many times the fog rolls in or the cabbage boils over, you find a way to make it work. Maybe you'll write a letter. Maybe you'll nap. Maybe you'll just sit by the window and watch the world misbehave. Before sleep comes, you take a last look around your little room, at the chipped teacup, the fading wallpaper, the cat already curled up in a ball of pure apathy. You realize that survival isn't about grand gestures or perfect days. It's about small acts of defiance, putting on a bright ribbon, finishing the last biscuit, refusing to let Mrs. Witherspoon's gossip darken your mood. Because in Victorian London, tomorrow is always another foggy day. But as long as you have a blanket, a sense of humor, and something mildly questionable brewing in the cupboard, you'll manage. You'll make plans, break them, and still wake up, ready to face the city again. And as you finally close your eyes, you know you've earned the rest. Tomorrow can bring whatever it wants. You, at least, are prepared. Nothing says ambition like attending a society ball with just enough laudanum in your system to feel like you're floating, and not in a romantic way. You waltz in, clutching your dance card and trying to remember which Lord Featherstone is the eligible one and which is wanted for tax evasion. The chandeliers spin, the gossip sizzles, and you do your best to look mysterious while mentally composing your grocery list. Ballrooms are a different universe, bright, glittering, and engineered to showcase society's finest, or at least its most determined social climbers. The room is a riot of silk, perfume, and dangerous optimism. Every inch is filled with the soft crunch of taffeta, the faint but persistent aroma of hair pomade, and the collective hope that nobody will faint into the punch bowl before midnight. You steady yourself at the entrance, squinting through a pleasant haze of opiates and candle smoke. A gentleman bows with exaggerated flair. Is he the lord, the poet, or merely another hopeful cousin in a borrowed waistcoat? Your laudanum-fogged memory offers only hints. Something about fox hunting, bad poetry, and a suspiciously large number of unpaid tailors. You decide to err on the side of politeness and avoid discussing taxes, just in case. The dance card is both your shield and your sentence. You hold it tightly, pencil hovering as names are scribbled in with varying degrees of desperation. There's a certain etiquette to filling the card. First, the safest choices, then the ones with family connections, and finally, in a fit of recklessness, a mystery partner who may or may not have a mustache. The music begins, a waltz so lively it threatens to expose any lack of coordination, sobriety, or both. You are swept onto the floor, gliding between couples who alternate between flirtatious laughter and the quiet panic of forgetting which direction is clockwise. Your partner tries to make conversation about the weather, the latest government scandal, and whether you believe in phrenology. You smile enigmatically and nod at intervals, hoping it passes for wit. As the night progresses, the gossip intensifies. Every dance is an exchange of secrets, half-truths, and veiled insults. You overhear that Lady Belgrave's new tiara is rumored to be paste, not diamonds, that someone has been seen in the conservatory with a foreign countess, and that at least 3 people are suspected of being French. You move from partner to partner, swirling through a sea of intrigue, careful to keep your posture regal and your remarks non-committal. Between dances, you take refuge by the refreshment table. The punch is aggressively red, the biscuits aggressively stale. You nibble on a sandwich and wonder how long you can stand on one foot before someone notices. Across the room, Henrietta is cornered by a minor baronet with major halitosis. Josephine has stationed herself near the musicians, eyeing a promising flautist and pretending not to notice her dance card is still blank. You find yourself in conversation with a dowager countess who asks after your mother, your prospects, and whether you have ever considered marrying into shipping. You deflect with practiced charm, all while mentally calculating how many eggs you have left at home. Mysterious is the evening's guiding principle. If anyone questions your distant look, you simply say you're contemplating the mysteries of the universe or the punch recipe. The evening ends in a blur of bows, curtsies, and exchanged calling cards. You make your way home, feet aching, head spinning, and dress slightly askew. In your pocket, you find a flower, a crumpled waltz program, and the sense that you've survived yet another night on the front lines of Victorian ambition. Because in London society, success is measured in small victories, not fainting, not being proposed to by the wrong Lord Featherstone, and making it home with your dignity, if not your memory, mostly intact. Your household staff knows everything. The maid knows who visited, the cook knows what you ate or didn't, and the butler knows exactly how much opium is missing from the parlor. You've long suspected your secrets are the only thing keeping the scullery maid entertained. Every footstep is a potential headline, and you're not sure if you're the employer or the star of their private soap opera. There's a certain comfort in routine, silver polished, bread baked, and cushions plumped with military precision. But beneath the surface of Victorian domestic harmony lies a web of intrigue, speculation, and unsanctioned storytelling worthy of the penny dreadfuls. The house runs smoothly because everyone in it is not only an expert in dusting, but also in deduction. It begins in the morning. You emerge for breakfast and find the toast cut precisely as you like it, not too thin, not too thick, but just the way you described offhandedly last Thursday, while fretting over a letter from Aunt Mildred. The maid, Agnes, offers a knowing look as she pours your tea. You smile back, hoping she hasn't found the poem you tucked under your pillow or noticed the missing laudanum bottle behind the clock. The cook, Mrs. Bramley, knows the full menu of your moods. Porridge appears when you're anxious, plum cake when you're sad, and, on days when you seem particularly despondent, a mysterious stew that even the cat won't touch. She claims it's restorative. You suspect it's a gentle warning. Smile or face the consequences. The butler, Mr. Finch, is the silent observer, the keeper of keys, schedules, and unspoken judgments. He glides through the halls, a monument to discretion, though you know he can quote verbatim every quarrel, confession, and ill-advised midnight snack since he first donned his starched collar. Once, when you were certain the house was empty, you caught him humming the refrain from your favorite and thoroughly improper music hall tune. The next day, the sheet music mysteriously vanished from your piano. Then there's the scullery maid, Sally, whose real occupation is information management. You once found her reading a note addressed to Henrietta upside down, while polishing the cutlery with an enthusiasm reserved for those who've just learned the true identity of a secret admirer. Sally knows the rhythms of the house, who comes, who goes, and who lingers just a little too long by the back gate. Her side job is reporting these facts, slightly embellished, to her friends at the greengrocer's, ensuring that by sundown, the whole street is abuzz with the news that you might possibly have taken up fencing lessons. Privacy, in this world, is a polite fiction. You practice whispering secrets in the parlor, only to find a freshly dusted vase on the windowsill that wasn't there an hour ago. Henrietta, ever the optimist, suggests testing the staff's intelligence by planting rumors. Last week, you invented a cousin in Australia. By morning, Agnes had already inquired after his health, and Mrs. Bramley had made lamingtons in his honor. Still, the staff's attentiveness has its perks. When you lose your favorite glove, it reappears by your breakfast plate, cleaned and pressed. When you return home after an especially taxing afternoon, there's always hot tea waiting and a discreet absence of questions. You are cared for, coddled, and, admittedly, very gently surveilled. It's hard to resent the staff for their curiosity. After all, in a house where drama is the only reliable form of entertainment, you play your part as much for their amusement as your own. If you catch Sally listening at the door, or Mrs. Bramley tasting the sherry just to be sure, you turn a blind eye. Because in Victorian London, every lady of the house is both employer and leading lady, with a full staff of critics, confidantes, and the world's most devoted audience. And if they gossip, well, at least you know the story will always have a captive crowd. Every opium lady has that one piece of jewelry, a brooch, a ring, a pearl necklace, borrowed from a French actress. And inevitably, it goes missing. Was it lost at the theater, pawned for rent, or simply carried off by the neighbor's ferret? You spend the day retracing your steps, blaming the cat, and vowing never to trust a woman in peacock feathers again. It begins innocently enough. One morning, you reach for your favorite brooch, a delicate silver crescent, rumored to have belonged to a Russian princess, or, failing that, a particularly stylish aunt. It is nowhere to be found. You check the usual places, your dressing table, the pocket of yesterday's shawl, and the spot behind the sofa where small valuables and larger secrets often vanish together. Nothing. The search escalates quickly. You interrogate Byron the cat, who meets your questions with his usual blend of indifference and feline condescension. You check his favorite hiding places, under the bed, behind the coal scuttle, and once, disastrously, in the middle of Mrs. Bramley's freshly folded linen stack. No luck. The only evidence is a faint trail of cat hair and a deepening sense of conspiracy. Next comes a review of recent outings. You think back to last night at the theater, where your brooch had certainly been pinned to your dress at the start of Act 1, but was suspiciously absent by the final curtain. Did it fall off as you applauded Lady Belgrave's dramatic fainting? Did you lend it, in a burst of misplaced generosity, to Josephine, who is infamous for her permanent borrowing habits? Or did it slip quietly into the hands of the lady in peacock feathers, who seemed a little too interested in your accessories and not nearly interested enough in the play? You question Henrietta, who swears she hasn't seen your brooch but admits she once lost a pearl earring that later turned up inside a crumpet. You survey the housemaid, who produces a small pile of unrelated but equally mysterious objects. A chipped cameo, a half-melted wax seal, and what might be the missing ring from your jewelry box. Now sporting a fresh dent and a story nobody wants to hear. The cook weighs in with a theory about the neighbor's ferret, who has been seen making off with everything from socks to slices of ham. You recall a brief, chaotic moment at last week's garden party, where the ferret scurried under the tablecloth and emerged carrying a silk ribbon and a look of wild satisfaction. Could your brooch have met the same fate? You peer over the garden fence, hoping to spot a glittering clue in the ferret's lair, but only see the neighbor's son practicing trumpet, an ordeal best observed from a distance. You briefly consider the pawn shop. There was, after all, that month when rent was due, and your jewelry box looked suspiciously light. But a discreet visit to Mr. Plunkett's emporium of discreet transactions yields nothing but a lecture on the importance of family heirlooms and a scuffed silver spoon you're pretty sure never belonged to you. By afternoon, the household is abuzz. Everyone has a theory. The butler suggests you simply misplaced it. The maid hints at supernatural forces. Josephine insists it will turn up when you least expect it, which is exactly what she said about your missing hat pin last spring, and you still haven't seen it. The day ends as all jewelry hunts do, with resignation, a vague suspicion of everyone you've ever met, and a renewed vow to never lend or temporarily store anything more valuable than a wooden button. You pin on an older, less interesting brooch and remind yourself that in Victorian London, the real treasure is not what you own, but what you still have when the ferret is done with you. And as you finally settle in for the night, you make a mental note. Next time, keep the good jewelry somewhere truly safe, like inside a biscuit tin, or possibly in the neighbor's trumpet case. The Victorians loved a good séance almost as much as they loved their stimulants. After supper, the parlor fills with incense, whispers, and the distinct feeling that nobody's taking this seriously except the medium, and she's already pocketed your last shilling. You sit in a circle, holding cold, clammy hands, hoping for a message from the spirit world, or at least a good story for your diary. It always begins innocently enough. Supper plates cleared, chairs rearranged, the heavy curtains drawn tight to keep out both the London fog and the prying eyes of Mrs. Witherspoon. Henrietta dims the lamps. Josephine finds the matches. Someone passes around a bowl of stale violet pastilles to ward off evil spirits, though their real purpose is to clear the air of cabbage and desperation. The medium, Madame Astrid, tonight, arrives draped in scarves, trinkets, and the subtle aroma of last week's gin. She surveys the room with eyes as wide as her price list. The veil is thin this evening, she intones, voice quivering, and the spirits are restless. In truth, the only restless things are your feet, half numb from an hour perched on a too small ottoman. The séance begins with everyone joining hands around the table, trying not to shiver as Madame Astrid mutters in French, or possibly very poor Italian. The room fills with the sound of uneven breathing, muffled giggles, and the steady tick of the mantel clock. Byron the cat prowls beneath the table, convinced this is an elaborate game devised just for him. Madame Astrid asks for silence, closes her eyes, and begins to sway. The table creaks. A candle flickers. A gust of wind rattles the window. "Is there anyone here with us?" she asks the darkness. A pause, as everyone tries to suppress the urge to giggle. Henrietta's stomach growls. Josephine stifles a sneeze. And then, a mysterious knock. The group jumps. The medium gasps. That was the spirit world. But you know the real culprit. The butler in the hallway, dropping his boot in a bid to eavesdrop on the proceedings. The show must go on, so Madame Astrid asks for messages from beyond. "Does anyone have a question for the dearly departed?" she inquires, eyes scanning for anyone who looks credulous enough to hand over another shilling. You take the opportunity to ask if your missing brooch might be in the afterlife. Madame Astrid closes her eyes, rocks in her chair, and eventually announces that it's safe, but maybe closer than you think. Josephine, quick as ever, whispers that this probably means the ferret took it. Again, suddenly, the table lurches, courtesy of Henrietta's restless foot. "The spirits are strong tonight," proclaims the medium. The group is now half believing, half hoping for a visit from a wealthy ancestor, willing to offer stock tips, or at least a good scone recipe. As the séance continues, the atmosphere grows thick with possibility and incense. Madame Astrid interprets a sudden draft as the presence of Great Aunt Mildred, who, from the sound of things, is still very concerned about your posture. She issues a few generic warnings about mysterious men and bad investments, solid advice in any era. The circle breaks. The medium thanks you, accepts another shilling for spiritual upkeep, and sweeps out with the flair of a woman who never intends to return your umbrella. Byron the cat emerges, disappointed there were no actual ghosts, and resumes plotting the downfall of the houseplants. The evening winds down with nervous laughter, a round of tea, and promises to never mention that Josephine tried to summon Byron, Lord, not the cat, and nearly fainted when the curtains moved. Because in Victorian London, after-dinner entertainment isn't just about whist or charades. Sometimes it's about summoning the spirits, crossing your fingers for family secrets, and hoping nobody asks too many questions about missing heirlooms. And even if no ghosts appear, you always get a good story, and occasionally your missing jewelry, out of the night. London rain is less a weather event and more a permanent roommate. The city is soaked, your shoes are soaked, even your soul feels a bit soggy. You sit by the window with a cup of nearly tea, practicing your best tragic heroine gaze for passing strangers. The only thing more constant than the drizzle is your commitment to melancholy, as both lifestyle and defense mechanism. You begin the day with hope, a foolish thing in Victorian London, where the clouds roll in before you've finished your morning tea. The drizzle is relentless, a damp symphony of droplets against the glass. It turns the city into a watercolor painting left out in a thunderstorm, blurred, faded, and slightly sticky. Even Byron the cat, usually a force of chaos, refuses to leave the hearth. He glances up at you with the air of a seasoned philosopher who has seen too many umbrellas fail. Your shoes, which once aspired to elegance, have resigned themselves to a life of squelching. Every step from bed to window is accompanied by the sad soundtrack of waterlogged leather. You make a mental note to ask Mrs. Bramley about her rumored secret for drying footwear. It involves potatoes, string, and a prayer to Street Crispin. Until then, you're forced to accept that squishy toes are your new normal. Rainy days require a particular breed of determination. The world outside is gray, the light inside is gray, and your cup of nearly tea is the color of mild regret. You consider adding more sugar, but even that can't brighten the atmosphere. Instead, you settle in for a long session of productive brooding. Melancholy isn't just a mood, it's a daily regimen. You perfect your forlorn stare, letting it drift out the window and across the soggy street, where Mrs. Witherspoon is valiantly attempting to keep her hat attached in a gale. You try reading poetry. The words run together, damp and dramatic, full of longing and weather metaphors that now feel more like meteorological forecasts than artistic sentiment. You dab at the fogged window with your sleeve and contemplate starting your own epic, Ode to a Leaking Roof and the Shoes That Died for It. Henrietta suggests indoor activities, a round of cards perhaps, or charades, but nothing pairs with this rain like a thorough, self-indulgent sulk. You listen to the city. The rhythm of rain is occasionally interrupted by the distant clatter of a carriage, the splash of a particularly enthusiastic puddle, or the weary sigh of the landlord as he inspects another mysterious drip in the hallway. From time to time, the world outside erupts in laughter, a group of children racing through the rain, completely immune to the perils of damp socks. You envy their reckless optimism. Rain has a way of blurring boundaries between day and night, indoors and outdoors, reality and melodrama. The usual chores can wait. You stare into the middle distance, inventing tragic backstories for your fellow Londoners. The umbrella vendor who dreams of sun, the street sweeper who once wrote poetry, the mysterious figure in the blue cloak who always passes at 3 and has never once looked up. By mid-afternoon, you've achieved peak brooding. You're half tempted to pen a dramatic letter to a non-existent suitor, describing your struggle against the elements and your undying affection for dry socks. Instead, you settle for a second cup of tea. This one's slightly stronger, as befitting your growing sense of existential accomplishment. Evening falls, and the rain continues, indifferent to your suffering. You wrap yourself in a shawl, gaze once more out the window, and toast the perseverance of every Londoner who has ever chosen drama over practicality. Because in Victorian London, the weather may be relentless, but so is your commitment to melancholy. And tomorrow, when the clouds finally part, you'll almost miss the comfort of having something so reliable to brood about. Almost. So here we are, drifting gently to the end of another improbable day in Victorian London, where the air is thick with fog and gossip, the tea is always lukewarm, and the line between medicine and recreational chemistry is charmingly non-existent. Tonight, you've survived faded velvet sofas, questionable cough syrup, and conversations so awkward they could qualify as minor trauma. You've made it through the labyrinth of friendship, fashion, scandal, and self-diagnosed maladies, all while pretending you don't notice the landlord's footsteps outside your door. It wasn't easy. You've dodged Aunt Mildred's judgment, outwitted the apothecary, and perfected the 1,000-yard stare of a woman who's heard just one too many ghost stories. You found meaning in embroidery, power in a perfectly placed hat pin, and comfort in the warm glow of an opium pipe, at least until the laudanum ran out. So tonight, as you slip under modern blankets in a bed with actual springs, hot water, and no risk of a seance breaking out in your living room, maybe whisper a quiet thank you. Not just for Wi-Fi and ibuprofen, but for every ancestor, real or adopted, who endured muddy streets, overcooked cabbage, and the kind of social anxiety that only comes from too many layers of petticoats. Because history, even at its most bizarre, is a testament to resilience. The women of Victorian London carried on, through fog, scandal, and the very worst poetry readings, proving that survival sometimes looks like laughter, sometimes like stubbornness, and sometimes like closing your eyes and hoping tomorrow's soup tastes less like regret. So, rest easy. The past is over, the pipes are empty, and the only thing you need to do now is let go of the day, breathe deep, and drift quietly into dreams. Good night, and may your sleep be free of fog, fainting couches, and any mysterious Victorian ailments.